everybody, it's Michael from Wahoo Comics here with another comic investing video where I share some investing tips and then show off some books at the end that illustrate those tips in action. And so today we are going to be talking about the concept of range. Now, what is range? Well, I got the idea of this video from a book written by David Epstein called Range. And in this book, he makes the argument that people who have a wide range of interest and experiences are more likely to excel in the things that they do than people who specialize in one certain area. And he applies that idea to many different fields. And so, for instance, he starts off talking about youth sports. And he describes how when people like me were a kid, and if you grew up playing sports, you probably played several different sports throughout the year. So maybe you played football in the winter, basketball in the fall, baseball in the spring, or some other combination of sports. But he talks about how in the last couple of decades, youth sport philosophy has changed to where kids are now encouraged to specialize in a certain sport rather than play lots of different ones. So in other words, if a kid or his parents decide that they want to play soccer, they're encouraged to play soccer all year around. So winter, spring, summer, fall, to play soccer and not to worry about other sports. And of course, the idea is that, well, if I want to get good at soccer, then I just really need to be focused on soccer, soccer, soccer. And the more time I spend on it, the better I'm going to get at this sport. But what he has found when studying elite level athletes, so athletes who reach the professional level, that actually those who reach that level are more likely to have played several different sports growing up as a kid instead of specializing in the one that they ended up playing. And the idea is that in different disciplines, you learn skills that they can translate into other disciplines. And so in other words, when you're playing baseball, you learn a lot of hand-eye coordination, more than you would learn playing in other sports. But then that hand-eye coordination then benefits you in those other sports. Or in basketball, you learn how to jump, and then that helps you when you're playing football. And again, he applies this to all kinds of areas, and even to comic book writing. And so he talks about how a few years ago there were a couple of college business professors that did a study of which factors would increase the probability that a comic writer's comic book would be a commercial success, which of course, if it's a success, is an indicator that it's good. Lots of people want to buy it, right? And they had a theory that there would be three main factors. First of all, they thought that experience would be a factor. So in other words, they thought that people who had been writing comics for a longer period of time would be more likely to produce a successful comic book than someone who is new. Secondly, they thought repetition would matter. So in other words, not only how long, but how frequently you've written. And they thought that people who wrote more things would be better at producing a successful comic book than people who only wrote a few things. The idea, of course, is that by getting more experience in writing, they were more likely to have the knowledge to produce something good. And thirdly, they thought resources would matter, so that if the writer was working with a company, a publisher that had a lot of resources, they were more likely to produce a successful comic book. But they actually found out that none of those factors were reliable predictors of whether or not a comic book writer's comic was successful. And in fact, they found out that repetition actually made it more likely that he would be unsuccessful in his book. And their idea was that when you're writing all the time, you just get burned out. And so you start losing creativity and other things like that. So what did they find was the main factor in increasing the probability of a writer having a successful comic book? Well, they found out that it was how many genres that writer had written in before. And so in other words, if there was a writer who had written things in the Western, romance, mystery, humor genre, then that person was more likely to produce a successful comic book than someone who had simply written sci-fi their whole lives. And the idea was that, again, by having a wide range of experiences, they were able to translate thoughts from one genre to the other. And so by writing in Westerns, it helped them to think how to write sci-fi better. And of course, this is the history of one of the greatest franchises of all time, Star Wars. You probably have heard Star Wars referred to as a space Western. So George Lucas took Western ideas and concepts and translated them into space, and of course made this hugely successful and epic story. How does this apply to comic investing, though? Well, I think what I've taken from this is that if I want to get good at comic investing, that it's important that I'm focused not just on comics, but on having other interests and hobbies in my life, and then thinking of how those hobbies, the skills or things that I learn in those, can translate into comics. So for instance, for me, one of my main hobbies outside of comic collecting is playing the game Magic the Gathering. Perhaps some of you have played that. And just to kind of really simplify the idea of the game in case you haven't played it, you're putting together a deck of cards that you are hoping outperforms your opponent's deck. And normally you're going to put together a deck that contains 60 cards. Now the hard thing is that there are thousands of Magic cards, and for me at least, most of them are super cool. And so I want to jam them all into my deck. But if I put suboptimal cards in my deck, then I'm going to be more likely to miss out on drawing the more optimal cards when I need them. And so I have to make the hardest decision to cut cards that I love so that my deck will perform at the highest level possible. This is a tangent. If you do play Magic, comment below and let me know what color mage you consider yourself to be. I am certainly a blue mage because I love to draw all the cards. Well, how does playing that game help me with comics? Well, just like there are hundreds and thousands of Magic cards that I would love to include in my deck, there are hundreds and thousands of comic books that I want to buy and add to my collection. But of course, I don't have infinite resources. And so I have to make cuts. I have to make the hard decisions. And if I'm thinking as an investor, I have to think, all right, this book is super cool, but is it really optimal as an investment? Now, as I've talked about before, there's lots of reasons to buy comic books. So if you're not thinking as an investor, you might just want to add a book because it's a beautiful piece of art, and that's totally legitimate. But I'm speaking just if you're thinking of comics as an investment, you have to think, well, is this an optimal buy right now, or is there a better buy? And you have to make those hard cuts. And what those cuts need to be can vary even over time. And I've learned this through Magic. So in Magic, there's something called a metagame. And so what cards are most optimal change over time as new cards are introduced into the game and the game evolves in other different ways. And so something that may have been a good card a year ago may not be a good card now. And so I have to replace that. Well, it's the same thing with comic book investing. So for instance, a comic book that I really want to add to my collection is Werewolf by Night number 32, because it contains the first appearance of Moon Knight, a character that I really love. But unfortunately, as you may know, and it's fortunate in one sense, there's a Moon Knight show coming out next week, and I'm really excited about that show. But it's unfortunate for me in terms of me wanting to buy Werewolf by Night 32, because that book is probably at its peak right now because there's so much interest in that character. And so even though I want to go on eBay right now and just do a buy it now for a 9.8 Werewolf by Night 32, I have to make that cut because I just know it's not an optimal decision right now. Now I'm hoping a year from now that book has dipped when some of the excitement has gone away, and then at that point I'm selling a book that is at its peak, that was optimal to buy now, but is at its peak, that I sell that, and then I'm able to buy Werewolf by Night 32. But again, this idea of cutting things and deciding which comics are optimal, they're all skills that I've learned from playing Magic the Gathering. It's not just hobbies and interests. You also can do with your career. And so, for instance, Epstein talks about how in 2001, a man named Alf Bingham, who was the vice president of research and development strategy at a company called Eli Lilly, had a team of scientists that had 21 problems that just stumped them. And so Bingham came up with the idea to post these problems on their website or in other forums worldwide and allow people from all over the world to give solutions to these problems. And he got a lot of pushback because all the scientists were like, what do you mean? This is our specialty. We've spent years in university. We've spent years at this job learning to solve these types of problems, and we can't solve them. How is some idiot on the internet going to solve them? And so his boss actually at first wouldn't let him put him on the web, but he really pushed for it. He said, "No, we need fresh eyes on this problem." And so eventually he went out. He got those problems on the website, and then solutions started pouring in from people who were not scientists answering scientific problems. And the idea was, the scientists, because they were so specialized, they had a kind of tunnel vision and were only able to think about the problems from a chemistry perspective or an engineering perspective. But when a lawyer on the other end of the problem looked at it, he was able to see it through a different set of lenses and was able to come up with a solution. And so again, what's that have to do with comic investing? Well, I think each of us can look at our careers, or if you're in school, your career as a student, and think, what are skills that I'm developing here that can translate and help me in comic book investing? So for instance, I'm going to look at my career, and this is going to be a little bit of a fun game. I'm not going to tell you what my career is. I'm going to give you a hint in a moment, but in the comments, I want you to guess what my career is, and if anybody gets it, if you're the first one to get it, I'm going to send you a copy of my Sleeper of the Week, which is Avengers number 246, which contains the first appearance of Maria Rambeau, the mother, of course, of Monica Rambeau. And this was a character that was in the original Captain Marvel movie, and there's speculation that she might have a bigger role going forward. So comment below, tell me what you think my career is, and here's my hint. So in my career, a big part of it involves building relationships with people and then offering them some sort of care. And that's a skill that I've developed over time. And it's a skill, though, that has translated for me into comic book investing. If you've watched my videos, you know I've mentioned how I buy the majority of my books not off of eBay or not from LCSs, but from either collectors who have been collecting for a long time and are looking to pass on their collection, or from people who have inherited a collection from their father or their grandfather or someone else. And when I come into contact with these people, I am really able to do a good job because of the skills that I've learned through my career in building a relationship, building trust, and showing care for these people. And that really means a lot to them, because for people in that demographic of selling, the books they have really have an emotional connection for them. They either have a real personal connection, or they know that these books were important to their dad or their grandfather or something like that. And so it's tough for them, just to let them go at times. And so when I've come in contact with them and started to talk to them, and really show that, hey, I really care. I'm not just, looking to do a business transaction. Obviously I love comic books, but I really try to show care and concern for them, and to, like if they inherited from their dad or something like that, I'll mention, man, your dad put together an awesome collection, and I think those kinds of words really mean a lot to people. And I'm certainly not saying them like out of some sense of flattery to try to manipulate. I think people can tell when you're genuine. So hopefully, they see that I am genuine and really caring for them. And what I mean by saying, wow, your dad put together a great collection or something like that. But building that relationship, and not just, and seeing the person on the other side of this transaction as a real person that I should care about, and not just try to see them as someone I'm trying to get a deal on, but really see them as a real person. That's a skill that I've learned through my career, and it's one that's helped me to make a lot of good deals with people, because they want to help you out if they feel like they're cared for in general. And the reason that I wanted to do this video at this time is because if you've been watching my videos, there's one seller that I've built a relationship with over the past year, who's really done me a lot of great favors. So about a year ago, he started selling his books, and he sent me a list of what he was looking to sell. And there are so many cool ones that I couldn't afford them all just at once. And so he said, hey, after we built some relationship and trust, and saw that I was someone who was genuine, he said, hey, tell me which ones you want. I'll lock in the price for you, and you just send in money each month, and then every quarter I'll ship whatever books out to you until you've paid for them all. And man, that really takes a lot from somebody to make that kind of offer to you. And he's been good to his word, even though a lot of those books have gone up in value over the past year. And he could have reneged or ghosted me, but he hasn't. And I think a big part of it is we've built a friendship. He's the person. If you saw my last video last week from the unboxing, he's the person who sold me the Daredevil 1. And if you saw that video, you know that he actually sent me that book before I'd fully paid for it, so that I could send it off to CGC, get it back, and we'd know exactly what grade it had, so that I wouldn't be overcharged. I mean, who does that? Who just sends you a book like Daredevil 1 without you fully paying for it? Man, that really obviously means something to me. But I think that was only possible because of the friendship and the relationship that we built. And those, again, are skills that come from my career. Now, the reason I'm talking about this time is I'm sad in a sense that I just finished paying for all the books on the list. So I got my last shipment of books from him. So it's bittersweet, but definitely, like I said, I've built a real friendship, and so I expect us to continue to stay in touch. But these are some awesome books, just like all the other ones that I've gotten. And I'm going to show them off to you, and I'm going to run through them quick. The video getting close to 20 minutes here. I'm trying to stick close to that. But Star Wars #1. This is actually the 5th copy that I've picked up from him. I love this book. As I mentioned before, one of the greatest stories ever. Tomb of Dracula #1. Awesome book. Werewolf by Night #1. I'm really big on this book right now. Going back to the Moon Knight series, one of my big predictions is that this character is going to make an appearance in some way in that show, because there's a Werewolf by Night Halloween special coming up sometime later this year off of Disney, I guess in Halloween time. And so I think they're going to introduce him here to set up for that show. And of course, Moon Knight debuted in this title, so they have a lot of connection. Swamp Thing #1. Eternals #1. Howard the Duck #1. This seller specialized in getting #1s. Joker #1. What a great character. Spider-Man 2099 #1. Another book that has gone up in value since a year ago because of the Into the Spider-Verse 2 movie, but he still gave it to me at the value it was a year ago. Secret Wars #1. Madame Xanadu #1, and then this seller's always thrown in a couple of freebies for me. Some cool ones: Marvel Spotlight, the second volume #1, and Dragon Slayer #1. And he actually sent me 2 other comic books this time, but I can't show them to you because it would spoil what my career is. And he knows what it is. So Barry, I know you probably watched this video. You don't put it in the comments. You don't count. You know what I'm doing. But he said, hey, these books are connected to my career, and he said it just seems like books that you should have. And so I thought that was really cool. And so again, I'm very thankful for all the books I've picked up from him over the past year. It'll always mean a lot to me. Some awesome books. But I believe the skills that I developed in my career helped me to be able to pick up those books. And so that's going to bring me to my question of the week. So of course, I've talked about how my interest and my career have helped me to build skills that have translated into comic book investing. I'm curious, what are some skills you've developed from your interest or career that then can develop and can translate into comic book investing? I'm really curious to hear this. I'm really fascinated by this idea. So whatever you do, think, and not just for the comments, but for yourself. What skills do I have that can help me in comic books? And then vice versa, and I don't have time to talk about this, I think investing in comic books have actually helped me some in my career. The fields touch each other. But tell me, I'm really fascinated. Let me know. Of course, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, I'd appreciate if you'd consider doing so. We are obviously now on the road to 300, still have a while to get there, but I'd appreciate it if you'd be part of that journey. Like, comment, all those good things. I've enjoyed this video. Hope you benefited from it, and I'll see you in the next one.